Reading with your kids.
Hola, ni hao, konnichiwa, assalamu alaikum, shalom, mahaba, ciao, bonjour, namaste, jumbo, bienvenidos. Hey, my name is Jedley. Welcome to Reading with Your Kids. We are coming to you from the beautiful, wonderful, historical neighborhood of Reedville in the southwest corner of Boston, Massachusetts. We are so honored and so very happy that you are joining us in our mission to help all families grow closer through reading. We do that by sharing fun and thoughtful and thought-provoking conversations with fascinating people who just happen to be writing books for kids of all ages. Please be sure to tell all of your family and friends about the show. Let them know that they can hear us on the WREB AM/FM 24/7 radio network. And they can find us on the iHeartRadio app, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Good Pods, Amazon Music, Audible, Podcast Addict, wherever you find your favorite shows. We have a really powerful episode for you today. First up, one of my amazing interns, Kayla Nuehlen, introduces you to Rich Capriola. He is returning to the show to tell us all about a brand new updated version of his book, Help the Addicted Child. And later on, we'll hear from Tim Kleyn, who's here to celebrate grilled cheese. Yes, please. We would like to invite you to embark on a transformative journey with The Invisible Backpack, A Life of Courage, written by William RWYK. Are you burdened by past hurts, grief, or trauma? William's heartfelt narrative, born from his own struggles with depression and Tourette syndrome, offers a pathway to lightening your load. Just like you, he knows the weight of an invisible backpack, growing heavier as life unfolds. But in his touching story, William invites you to courageously unpack it, making space for forgiveness, acceptance, tolerance, and love. Join William on a profound exploration of healing, blessings, and inner strength. Through William's vulnerability, he reveals the power of embracing your true self. Don't miss this inspirational tale of resilience and hope. Order your copy of The Invisible Backpack today and embark on a journey of self-discovery and courage. This episode is brought to you by Jane Escapes to the Jungle of Individuality, a delightful book by Jennifer Nestor. This captivating, award-winning children's book celebrates the beauty of uniqueness and self-acceptance, inspiring young readers to embrace their own individuality by covering important topics like bullying, high-functioning anxiety, and mindfulness. This vibrant picture book is perfect for kids aged 4 to 9. Be one of the first to pre-order and take advantage of the exclusive early bird reward specials starting on Monday, April 29th through Kickstarter, like signed hardcover copies, Jane plushies, Jane backpacks, posters, and more. Act now by visiting JenEStoreAuthor.com. That's spelled JenEStoreAuthor.com. And clicking the pre-order button today. Get ready for a heartwarming adventure in Mommy's Day Off, the delightful picture book written by Jacqueline Christine. When young Louie's mom has to be away for a day, he's in for a wild ride with his dad. From waffle and ice cream breakfast to Wild West battles, they embark on an unforgettable journey filled with laughter and bonding. But as the day unfolds, Louie realizes there's a special magic that only his mom can bring to their home. Join Louie as he discovers the irreplaceable role his mom plays in his life, making Mommy's Day Off a touching tale of family, love, and the unique bond between a mother and her child. Get your copy today at Amazon or at JacquelineChristine.com. And now a great intern, Kayla Nuehlen from Emerson College, interviews Rich Capriola.
Thank you, Kayla, for inviting me to talk about this issue today about adolescent substance abuse. My background is I have had a long history of working in both education and mental health and substance abuse. Actually started out working in education for a little over 2 decades, and then transitioned out of that career and began working in mental health at a mental health crisis center. And worked there until I accepted a position at Menninger Clinic in Houston, Texas, which is a large psychiatric hospital, where I worked for over a decade treating adolescents and adults diagnosed with mental health and substance abuse disorders. And many times I would sit with a family and go over their child's history of using a substance and what they had used and how often they had used and how early an age they started using. And when I finished, they would look at me and they would say, I had no idea this was going on. Or they would say, I sort of thought something was going on, but I didn't think it was this bad. And these are good parents. They were doing the best job that they could do. They missed the warning signs because nobody told them what to look for. So when I retired from Menninger Clinic, I wrote my book, The Addicted Child, A Parent's Guide to Adolescent Substance Abuse. And I kept it to a little over 100 pages, but I wanted to put in that book the information that I would hope that parents would find helpful. What are the warning signs they should look for? How do drugs work in the teenage brain? What are some of the assessments that you should get done if you suspect your child is using a substance? What are the treatment options that are available, and how do you find a good treatment center, and what questions you should ask? So I built this resource. I wrote this resource to really be of help to parents and to help them feel better prepared and less paranoid about this topic.
Wow. Yeah, thank you. Do you want to jump into what you talked about, the warning signs that, could you give a little explanation? Because I know, parents kind of have maybe in their mind, they have an idea of what they could look out for, but I think kind of changing now a little bit. So,
Yeah, and in my book, I have warning signs for a child that might be using marijuana, and I have warning signs for a child that might be drinking alcohol, because many kids get into those two substances. But I also have warning signs on a child that might be developing an eating disorder or might be self-harming themselves, because an eating disorder and self-injury will sometimes accompany a child using a substance. So it's important parents know what to look out for there as well. So those warning signs are in my book, but as a general rule, what I say to parents is pay attention to the changes that you see in your child. You know your child better than anyone. So pay attention to the changes that you see. Don't assume that the changes that you're seeing are just normal adolescent acting out behaviors. They may very well be that, but they might also be a sign that there's something else going on underneath the surface that you need to pay more attention to. Examples would be a child whose grades are starting to decline, a child who used to enjoy participating in sports no longer has an interest in doing so, a child who used to introduce you to their friends and now becomes very secretive of who their friends are and becomes secretive of where they've been and what they've been doing. And then, of course, if you notice any drug paraphernalia or strange odors around the house or in their room, those are more obvious signs. But pay attention to these changes. If what you're seeing and the changes sort of come and go, it's probably not too concerning. But if they tend to linger on and on and on, and then you start to see more and more changes, then I think it's time to perhaps get a professional assessment to see what's going on.
Wow, I think this is so important, and I think it's really important that you wrote about not just, the typical alcohol or maybe some other kind of drug abuse, but also physical, like self-harm or EDs, eating disorders. So is there a reason that you decided to include that in your book as well? Just it's because it's becoming more prevalent in today's society and parents should be more aware, or did you see it when you were working?
I saw some of it when I was working with adolescents, particularly among girls. That's where I saw the bulk of the eating disorders or the self-injury was among young girls. And I think those issues of particularly self-injury do occur with the males. I just think that they're not diagnosed as often as we see it with girls, and the same is probably true of eating disorders. It's not a large percentage, But when you look at the reasons why a young girl is developing an eating disorder, or why a young girl is self-injuring themselves, we find that many times it's the same reason that a person is using alcohol or marijuana, and that reason is to medicate an underlying mental health issue that they find either intolerable or uncomfortable. It might be anxiety, it might be depression, it might be some type of trauma, it could be an emerging personality disorder, but it is either a thought or a feeling or a memory that is intolerable to that teenager. And like all of us, we're not built to just sit with those feelings that are disturbing to us. We want to get rid of them. And unfortunately, sadly, many times the solution to getting rid of them and removing them is found in a substance, or maybe it's in self-injury, or maybe it's in an eating disorder. What they have in common is that in many cases, a child is using those mechanisms, those behaviors to medicate that often undiagnosed and untreated mental health issue.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Yeah, that's. I think that's very important. The underlying issue, that it's not just out of nowhere or just, the evolution of life, but there's an underlying mental issue or regular issue happening in their life.
There is, when I asked teenagers who were smoking marijuana, and they were smoking a lot of marijuana, to help me understand why they were smoking so much marijuana, the number one answer that came back was, it helps me with my anxiety.
Yes. Yeah. I think that, anxiety or depression is a big reason for drug abuse or any other kind of self-harm or anything. So I think it's important now that there's research and books coming out with it. Would you say that parents of a boy or girl should keep an eye out specifically for eating disorders for girls and drug addiction for boys, or is it just anyone in general? It just depends what they're going through and what sticks for them.
Yeah, I think every child is vulnerable to being captured by either alcohol, drugs, or perhaps self-injury or an eating disorder. No child is totally protected. There are protective environments, but no child is totally protected. And it doesn't matter, whether you live in a rural, urban, or suburban area. It doesn't matter what your level of income is. Doesn't matter what church you might go to. It doesn't matter, where you are. All children are vulnerable to being captured by alcohol or drugs. And I don't say that to make parents feel paranoid. I want them to feel, prepared. I want them to know what the warning signs are and what they have to do in the event that they find out that their child is using a substance. Many of these parents that I worked at a psychiatric hospital. So the issue had become extremely out of control for them, and they felt that their last result was to hospitalize their child. Well, hopefully, if you know what the warning signs are and you recognize them and can intervene early, it's like everything else. The sooner you can get onto a problem, the sooner you can hopefully get it resolved.
Yeah, I think that's so important for parents to hear on this podcast, is ways to help and information to keep a lookout for. Would you say that it's just alcohol or marijuana, or would you say that there's an increasing, kind of other type of drug use, like Xanax, or I'm trying to think, opioids of some sort?
Yeah, for a long time, for years, the primary substances of choice among adolescents has been alcohol and marijuana. But recently, vaping has become an extremely important issue that we need to pay attention to. Prior to the pandemic, for 3 years prior to the pandemic, vaping of marijuana and vaping of nicotine among teenagers was just skyrocketing. It was increasing at dramatic rates, and it still is high. But aside from alcohol and marijuana, I think parents need to be aware and concerned about this vaping issue, vaping nicotine and vaping marijuana. The other drugs, there's probably less than 5% even less than 3% in some cases of teenagers using the hardcore drugs.
Right.
The one thing that I think parents need to be aware of is what's going on, with this issue of fentanyl.
Yes.
Fentanyl is unfortunately and sadly killing too many people through overdoses, unintentional overdoses. And sadly, many times this fentanyl is hidden within drugs that teenagers may be attracted to, like Xanax, that they buy off the street. So they take the pill, thinking, for example, that they're taking a Xanax pill, which they are, but not knowing that it's been laced with fentanyl. And unfortunately, that can have disastrous consequences. So, I think kids and parents just need to be aware that if they're getting drugs off the street, they're likely not very pure, and there can be instances where that drug would be laced with fentanyl that could have terrible consequences.
Yeah, I think one of the reasons Jed kind of set us up together for this interview was because here at Emerson College, I'm a part of a group called TACO, and it stands for Team Awareness and Combating Overdose. And we're kind of working with Emerson and with TACO's national organization to get fentanyl test strips and Narcan available to the students at Emerson. And I just think it's a very important topic for parents and for young adults and adolescents to learn about. Do you have any tips? Because it's so new, kind of, I feel like, for parents. Like, I'm not even sure if like DARE or other programs are teaching about it. Do you have any tips for like parents who are talking to their kids who are kind of coming of age?
Well, I think you mentioned probably the most important thing, and that is to build awareness of what fentanyl is, how it is being added to many of these drugs that are on the street, like Xanax. And you mentioned Narcan. I think that's something that parents need to be aware of, perhaps have in their medicine cabinet. Although many of these overdoses occur outside of the home, but it's something that parents need to be aware of and perhaps have handy at home just in case they might need it. But I think just awareness, as you mentioned, of this issue being out there. And for adolescents, as well as adults, the vulnerability of a drug, a powerful drug like fentanyl, being laced within other drugs that they may be seeking, like Xanax, I think that's the real danger. I don't think very many people are out there looking to buy fentanyl.
Right.
I think they're looking to buy drugs, and unfortunately, in too many cases, those drugs end up being laced with fentanyl. Yeah. That's the danger.
Absolutely. Do you think that it's smart for parents to sit down and have a conversation with kids, so that they're informed about the effectiveness of fentanyl and how deadly it truly is?
I do, and I think the discussion needs to focus on the danger of buying street drugs, not knowing that fentanyl is laced within the drug. And you can use examples like Xanax, for example, or any other prescription drug that might be out there. The message to the kids is you might think these drugs are safe, but you always run the risk of picking up a drug that's laced with fentanyl, and that's the danger for any street drug that's out there. Teenagers are going to downplay the significance of it. They're going to minimize the danger. But as a parent, you can educate them that the real danger in fentanyl is that it can be masked within other drugs that they may be out there seeking, and they need to be aware of that.
Yeah, I think that's a very important thing to keep in mind. This might be a stupid question, but I think that it's important to know and for parents to know, and even I'm not sure of the answer. Can fentanyl be mixed in any drug, or is it only basically a pushed or a pressed pill? or can it be in
It can be in other forms, but I think primarily the biggest danger is when it is laced within pill form, because that's what kids are after. It could be mixed in with cocaine and some other drugs, but I don't think that among the adolescent population that those hardcore drugs are being used by teenagers in very high percentages, and even some of the prescription drugs are not at high percentages. But if a kid is looking for something other than marijuana, other than alcohol, other than vaping, they're more likely to turn to a substance like Xanax.
Yeah. Do you have any advice for parents whose children might be, looking to get the Xanax, but like obviously the parents would want the children to get it in a safe, prescribed way? Would you just tell them, to go to the doctor or whoever to get that?
Yeah, I think the first thing you would do is get a good assessment done for the child to see what's going on and which medications might be appropriate, what diagnosis is appropriate, what the treatment options are. Medication like Xanax is very effective for anxiety, but there are other alternatives too. You don't want to necessarily, get a young man or woman, dependent on Xanax if they can find other ways to deal with their anxiety. But that all gets to the importance of, if you suspect your child is using a substance, or if you suspect your child might be struggling with a psychological issue, the importance of getting a professional assessment done so that you can get a diagnosis if it's appropriate, and if there is a diagnosis, a good treatment plan so that you can address the problem. I tell parents, if you suspect your child is using a drug, the first thing you should do is have a conversation with your child about it. And then if you're still concerned, get an assessment done so that you can rule in or rule out if there's a diagnosis. And if there is, what's the treatment plan? What's the appropriate treatment for your child?
Right. What's the next step?
What's the next step?
Yeah. Would you say that, I think you just said it, but the best thing for parents to take away from this is just to have an open conversation with their child about what's happening with fentanyl, what's happening with their child's mental state, drug use, self-harm, etc.
Yeah, I think you want to have that conversation. And if you suspect your child is using a substance, the first thing you should do is have a conversation with that child. And by that, I mean, don't attack the child. Don't threaten the child. Don't punish the child. You want to come at this conversation with an open mind, and you want to keep the focus on you, not on the child. In other words, you want to express your concerns. You want to express how perhaps they're using a substance frightens you or scares you, so you keep the focus on you rather than them, and you invite them into a discussion on how, if they're using a substance, say like marijuana, how that affects you as a parent, how it scares you. The other thing is, when we're talking with each other and when parents are talking with their kids, they do a very good job of listening to the words, but we don't do a good job of listening to the feelings behind those words. And that's a skill that every parent can learn and practice, so that when they're talking to their child, they're not just hearing the words, they're hearing the feelings behind those words and reflecting them back to the parent, back to the child. But I would say keep the focus on you as the parent. There's, let the child know how scared you are, if you are scared about them using a substance, how it affects you, and see if that will invite some type of conversation. Now, it may or may not, but regardless of how that conversation goes, if you still have concerns about your child using a substance, you need to move to the next stage, and that is get the assessments done from the professionals. Yeah.
Do you see a big amount of, I'm not sure if in this sense it would be called like a relapse, but like if a child is using drugs and then either goes somewhere to get help or just stops for their parents' sake or gets professional help, do you see a lot of relapses in that kind of sense?
Well, there's always a risk of a relapse. It's part of the entire process.
Right.
But it's particularly high in the event where you have a child who is using a substance to medicate a psychological issue, because oftentimes that psychological issue is not addressed, it's not diagnosed, and it's not treated. So, for example, if you have a child who is struggling with anxiety, and they've discovered that marijuana helps them with that anxiety, if all I do is treat the marijuana and I don't treat the anxiety, that kid might be able to stay away from marijuana for a while, but they're going to go back to what they know works to treat that anxiety. So, unfortunately, too many kids are undiagnosed who are struggling with these underlying emotional issues and have used a substance to medicate it. And we try to treat the substance abuse, but we don't recognize or treat the underlying issue. In those cases, the relapse potential is much higher.
Yeah, I think that's so important. That makes so much sense as well. You know, you have to treat the issue in order to stop the cause. Do you have any other things you'd like to talk about with your book, or anything other advice that we haven't talked about that you would like to give to parents or children right now?
Well, I know that this can be a very scary topic for parents, but I think knowledge is power. So I would recommend to every parent, learn what you can about it. You can start with my book, but gather the information, become informed. Hopefully it will help you feel less afraid and better prepared to deal with this issue in the event that you need to. The other thing that I would say to parents is, in my experience working with teenagers, it didn't do me any good to tell them that drugs were bad. It didn't do me any good to tell them drugs were illegal. It didn't do me any good to tell them that if they continue to use substances, they might not get very good grades or graduate or get into college or get a job, because they didn't believe any of that and they didn't care about it. But what did work? What did work was when I turned the discussion to a neuroscience approach, because kids are curious, they want to learn, and they wanted to learn about their brain. So if I could educate them about their brain, simple things like our brain doesn't become fully developed until age 24 or 25, what the different areas of the brain are responsible for. And then I could turn towards how do drugs work in the brain. And I have two pictures in my book. One is a picture of a brain, and it simply shows the different areas of the brain and what they do. And then I have another picture that shows where marijuana attaches itself to the brain. So the child is very easy. If you show it to the child, they can see that where marijuana attaches itself to the brain. That type of an approach, I found, they were interested in. They wanted to learn about the brain, and they became curious about not just how the brain works, but how do drugs work in the brain. That's a discussion that's more likely to capture their attention than to just say drugs are bad for you, don't do drugs.
Yeah. Would you say that? Would you recommend that? Health classes or schools start to take that kind of approach to educating kids on drugs, instead of just don't do drugs, this is what drugs are, kind of.
Instead of the once a year, twice a year assembly where we tell them drugs are bad for them, don't do drugs. So, I think you have a much better opportunity and potential to make a significant impact if you were to start, for example, in the elementary grades, and you were to focus on the neuroscience. In elementary grades, for example, just teach kids about the brain, not the drugs. Just teach them about the brain, how important it is, and what it does. And then when they move into middle school and high school with that understanding of the importance of the brain and what it does, then you can introduce how drugs work in the brain. So it's sort of an evolving process. You start by helping the child understand the importance of the brain and what the brain does. And then when they have that concept, then you introduce how drugs work in the brain. And if the schools were to change the curriculum so that they could do that, I think we'd see significant changes in the drug use among the teenage population.
Interesting. Would you say that the teenage population is the highest rate of drug use or self-harm, or any form of something like that, or is it more middle school or at past like college? What would you say is the?
Well, the rates in high school are still way too high. For example, we have almost half of high school seniors drinking alcohol, 46%. Mm-hmm. We have about 30% of high school seniors smoking marijuana. We have almost 8% of 8th graders smoking marijuana. And when it comes to vaping, vaping is even higher in some cases where, we have 23% of high school seniors doing some type of vaping. So these rates are still too high. Mm-hmm. They're not as high as they were before the pandemic, because what the pandemic did was it reduced significantly adolescent substance use. Mm-hmm. During that pandemic year, kids were pulled away from school and their friends and their activities, so the percentages of kids using marijuana and alcohol and drugs declined significantly. Now, since the pandemic, it's rebounded a little bit. It's still not to the pre-pandemic levels, but we'll have to wait to see if it trends back up to the pre-pandemic levels. It's still below the pre-pandemic levels, but in some cases it may be inching back up in that direction.
Interesting. Would you say that it was high because of like a party situation or like social drinking, social smoking, or was it just that's just what the numbers were before the pandemic?
I think there's two reasons why we see this adolescent substance abuse percentages that we do. The first is when we ask kids, we ask them, how available are these drugs? We ask them. And overwhelmingly, they tell us these drugs are easily available. No problem. Right. We ask them, how easy is it to get marijuana? 80% of kids tell us it's no big deal. I can get it if I want it. Mm-hmm. We ask them, how easy is it to get alcohol? Large percentage of them say, no big deal, I can get it. So these kids know that these drugs are widely available, and they know where to get them. The other thing we ask them is, okay, well, these drugs are widely available. How dangerous do you think they are? And overwhelmingly, these kids tell us we don't think they're dangerous. We don't think smoking marijuana frequently is very dangerous. We don't think drinking alcohol is dangerous. So now you have the situation where these kids believe the drugs and the alcohol are widely available, not difficult to get, and they don't think they're dangerous. So when you put those two things together, you see why we're seeing the rates of substance abuse among teenagers that we're seeing.
Mm-hmm. Interesting. Do you think that alcohol use and marijuana use in children in the high school ages is very impactful to their brain development and their mental health, etc., or is that kind of a little exaggerated by the amount of publicity it's been getting?
It's not exaggerated, and the reason it's not exaggerated is because the adolescent brain is different than the adult brain. Our brains get mature at around age 24, 25. So the adolescent brain is very vulnerable. It is growing and maturing and developing those skills, so to speak, that person will need in adult life. Well, anytime you introduce a substance, whether it's alcohol or marijuana or any other drug, into a vulnerable developing brain, you run the risk of doing some damage. Now, that damage might not be readily observable, but for example, the kids that I worked with were smoking a lot of marijuana. And when the psychological tests came back on those kids, what I saw was that the processing speed of their brain was below average. Their short-term memory was impaired, and their motivation wasn't very high. Now, some of those things, like the processing speed of their brain and their short-term memory, some of that might not be obvious to parents, might not even be obvious to teachers. We uncovered it, and it can be uncovered through psychological testing, but it's an example of how subtly some of these drugs can work within the adolescent brain, which is vulnerable, to produce some of these subtle changes that might affect the child, down the road.
Interesting. And I'm assuming that a lot of this information that you've shared today and these statistics and more is represented in your book.
Some of it is, not all of it, but some of it is, yes.
Yeah. Well, I think that's all for today, but this was a lovely conversation. Thank you so much, Richard. This was lovely. It was very, very informative, and I think it'll be very helpful.
Well, thank you, Kayla. I appreciate you taking the time to meet with me and for your very thoughtful questions and observations. And I hope that everybody who has an opportunity to listen to our discussion today walks away feeling as if they gained a little bit more information and maybe feel a little bit more informed about this topic. Thank you so much for inviting me and for participating in the discussion.
Thank you for joining Reading with Your Kids podcast.
This episode of the Reading with Your Kids podcast is brought to you by The Adventures of Toby Baxter, Book 2, River Home for the Holidays. It is a Reading with Your Kids certified great read written by Tim Wright. River Home for the Holidays delivers a captivating blend of humor, danger, and inspiration. For lovers of fantasy with mythical creatures, this book is a must-read, promising a thrilling and heartwarming adventure. Dive into the enchanting world of River Home alongside Toby Baxter, and you won't be disappointed. It is a Reading with Your Kids certified great read, great middle grade novel. You want to add this to your family library. The Adventures of Toby Baxter, Book 2, River Home for the Holidays, written by Tim Wright. This episode is brought to you by Nursery Rhymes for Kinder Times, written by Pam Gittleman. Are you uncomfortable with the dark, often horrific messages found in traditional nursery rhymes, but understand the strong positive impact that rhyming stories have on language, literacy, musicality, and imagination? If you said yes, we've got the perfect book for you. It's Nursery Rhymes for Kinder Times, written by Pam Gittleman. This multi-award-winning book contains 8 updated nursery rhymes designed to nurture kindness, empathy, and gratitude, with beloved characters and situations that allow them to illustrate a range of emotions while modeling what it means to be kind and compassionate. This collection will delight and educate a new generation of children and the adults who love them. Plus, each rhyme is coupled with emojis and discussion questions to support the social and emotional intelligence of preschoolers. It's the perfect gift for new parents or grandparents, a great addition to your home or school library, and a unique take on teaching kindness and language skills to our youngest learners. Get your copy today. Nursery Rhymes for Kinder Times by Pam Gittleman. Our guest is returning to the show, and we are real excited. Please welcome back the author and illustrator of Grilled Cheese, Yes Please. Here's Tim Kleyn. Hey, Tim, how are you?
I'm awesome. How are you?
I'm doing pretty wonderfully. I'm really excited to have you back on. I love speaking with you on your last visit, and I can't wait for you to tell us all about Grilled Cheese, Yes Please.
Yeah, thanks so much for having me. Grilled Cheese, Yes Please uses the same characters from my first book, Set Sail for Pancakes. So it's Margot and Grandpa, and it's just like a really cozy, fun, warm story featuring grilled cheese with a recipe on the back. Basically, they're waiting for Margot's mom to come back. They're kind of worried about her coming back in like the storm, and a bunch of like boats come by, and they're like, "It's really stormy out. Can we like stay with you on your little island?" And so as like time goes by, they're getting more and more worried, and they're running out of their grilled cheese, and then you'll have to read the rest of the book yourself to find out how it ends.
You know, we really love books that celebrate the intergenerational friendships and relationships, because I think it's in our world here in the States and many countries, you know, we're living in an age where I was just sharing with you, I just got back from Italy. I can be in Italy in the morning and back in Boston on the same day, which is kind of mind-boggling when you think about it. But with that mobility comes the fact that there are a lot of families who are spread out. I grew up in a neighborhood where I couldn't do anything wrong because I was related to everybody, and everybody kind of had permission to give me a dope slap if they saw me being dopey. But that's not reality for a lot of kids these days. You know, they'll have relatives all over the country or in different countries, and they might only see their grandparent or aunts and uncles once a year or maybe once every couple of years.
Yeah. I have a lot of family in Canada. So, like, even, like, growing up, we'd have to, like, take these big trips to see my grandparents and a lot of my relatives. Because both my parents were born in Canada, and a lot of my, like, if you go back further, there's a lot of family from the Netherlands, so there's just, like, a lot of spread out family.
Yeah. Sure. The Canadian influence, that's why you're such a nice guy.
It must be. Yeah, sort of. Yeah. Canadians are great. I love Canadians.
I do too. It's such a wonderful country. Like every country, there are some things that governments do that I kind of scratch my head about. But that can be said of this country too. But the people of Canada are really lovely and friendly, and I dig visiting.
Yeah, for sure.
So where's the you both of your books have this great connection with food and the intergenerational relationship. Where do you think that comes from?
I feel like we've always been like a family-centered family, and like really like connected to one another. And I also feel like my relationship with food has changed a lot. I feel like when I grew up, like we didn't have a lot of like money and resources, so I'd always like try to eat as like little as possible, and I would like not really enjoy food because it was just like kind of like I was stressed about like I don't want to eat too much. But then I feel like when I got older, I like learned like the simple joys of like you can make a great grilled cheese and great pancakes and like just like the simple joy that brings. And I also feel like there's something really special and like kind of like symbolic of like you can all like come together and be together. And I think food is such like a great thing to like come around, and like it just brings people together. So I think that's just like a great theme because it kind of unifies a lot of the things that I care about.
Yeah. I don't know if you do this, but our family has this thing where we don't necessarily name foods the way the rest of the world does. We give foods and dishes a specific name, and a lot of times it's the name of if somebody made us something, if we're visiting them and they made us something, and it wasn't a grilled cheese, it was an Ani ham and cheese, you know, and these are names that last for decades, and I don't know, it kind of adds, I think, some flavor when we're eating them and remembering the memory of that person making it for us the first time.
Yeah. My mom would always make this meal, and we would call it egg stuff. It's like, I never knew how to explain it to my friends because they're like, oh, you don't know egg stuff? Like, so it's great.
Well, what's in an egg stuffed sandwich?
It was like basically rice and cheese and sauce and egg. So I don't know. It was great.
I'm not sure if that sounds delicious or frightening. But the way you're smiling, I'm going to say it's delicious.
I feel like as a kid, I thought it was the best. I haven't had it in a few years, but you know.
Really cool. My dad used to make mayonnaise sandwiches when we didn't have any cold cuts in the house. It was just, put some mayonnaise on some bread and it was.
Yeah. Gotta do what you gotta do.
You gotta do what you gotta do. Tell me, I don't know if we spoke about this when you were on the show last, but what comes first for you as an author illustrator? Is it the images, or is it the story, or do they kind of grow together?
They do often grow together. I think it depends. This one, I feel like we really were trying to get like the plot down before sketching a lot, but it was also unique because like the characters already developed. There are new characters in this grilled cheese book, but I feel like a lot of the work this time around was like, what's the story? Let's nail that down. But I do often do like a lot of like character sketches before I like really write out like a final draft. Like, cause I studied illustration, so that's kind of like how I think.
Now, if I remember correctly, you have done a lot of design work for big brands. Am I remembering that right?
I guess like mid-sized brands. Like I'm a graphic designer as well, so I've done like a lot of that work. I actually like had an interview yesterday, so I'm looking for new graphic design work and excited for those opportunities. But I really enjoy like the conversation about how like graphic design and illustration are really connected, and you use like a lot of the same principles, and thinking about like whether it be like a business card or a children's book, like your image is like telling a story and giving an impression. And so I really like to think about like the meaning behind like every little element of a page or social media post or what have you.
Yeah. We have a lot of authors and aspiring authors who listen to the show. What are some of the things that you think, some of those attention to details that it would be important for somebody who is on their own and they're writing a book and they're self-publishing and they don't have the money for a social media manager and they're trying to, create all these images and everything. What are some of the details you think they should pay attention to?
I feel like just knowing the basics of like design, and then like I guess believing in yourself, and just like the being intentional with what you're saying. I feel like it's different for everyone, and it's interesting because I feel like this field is kind of subjective, but there are rules. So I would say like learn the rules first, and then you can like bend them. And I also feel like children's books is like a really fun like industry because it like encourages play. I almost feel like the act of like making a picture book is like playful, and then you're like creating a game, almost like here's this game that like these kids get to play with, and like through reading this book. So I think like being a combination of taking it seriously but also being playful with it and having fun will get you far.
You mentioned something I haven't heard before on the podcast. It's this idea that a book, it's a story, but it can also be this thing that kids get to play with. So it's a game or it's a toy. It's more than just a book. How do you think that using that kind of thought, how does that affect your writing as you're creating this game, this story, this book?
I feel like it frees me up to like have fun with it, and like encourages me to like push my story in that direction of like playfulness. Because I feel like when I first started out, I was kind of caught up in like, ooh, this is like big time. I gotta like do it the right way, and I gotta like do it like these people did it, and like it has to be very like, I don't know. I feel like you recognize and appreciate that kids are really smart, and like you get to like create patterns through your book, and like kids will appreciate that, and you can like really push humor and make it like a fun thing to read. And I think I'm like having more fun with it, and like loosening it up as like as an author especially.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. I know reading when my kids were young, and reading to them, if I was having fun with the read, my kids had way more fun.
Oh yeah. My mom used to read in like funny voices. I remember my dad did too, and like those are the ones that we remember the most, I feel like even now.
Yeah.
Hey. I remember my mom, there was like a Froggy book, I forget what they were called, but my mom was like, Froggy! And I feel like I remember that obviously still today, so it just sticks with you that way.
Yeah.
Have fun with it.
Yeah. You were sharing with me earlier that your child is 3 years old right now. How has becoming a dad changed you as an author and an illustrator?
It's a good question. I think it encourages me to think about things about how she thinks, and that also encourages me to be playful with the book. And sometimes I'll show her sketches or illustrations and see how she reacts to it, which is super fascinating to me. And it's oh, this sketch is Lucy approved because she really engaged with it. And yeah, it's interesting how a 3-year-old thinks and the things that they point out and are excited by. And so I try to implement more of those things into future projects. And I don't know, it's great to have Lucy to read through my stuff. Well, she doesn't read, but look through my books. It's great.
Yeah. I love that idea of paying attention to how your daughter is thinking. I think that's a really important skill for a parent to kind of work on, because I think it really would help in the relationship you have, and also in anticipating what it is that might motivate your kids.
Yeah, for sure. And I've also done a bunch of school visits, and it's really neat to see the kids engaging with certain parts of pages, and sometimes different groups of kids react differently, and especially with different age groups. But it's really neat. I feel it's almost a universal reaction when there's sound words on the pages, and or a little, almost an Easter egg if you put things in the illustrations that kids can point to and be "Oh, I found this." And I always felt that was those are really great tools for being an illustrator and author.
Yeah. I that's one of the things that I think is so much fun about picture books is, like a lot of great movies or TV shows, that there's more than one story going on. There's something that adults might get into that kids, it might go over the kids' heads, and vice versa. And engaging fully in that story. Those are the books that I wanted to read over and over with my kids.
Yeah, for sure. And I feel Grilled Cheese, Yes Please. I was really intentional about having themes and elements for the adults reading with their kids, and then fun stuff for the kids. And I feel it's really special to be able to bring those things together. Grandpa is dealing with his own emotions, and you're dealing with the characters struggling with worry and a hard time sharing, and just kind of a little anxiety, and it's things that you can talk about with your kids, and if they're too young, it's something that you can pick up on as an adult reader, and it's really nice to be able to bring those things together.
Yeah. I just had this thought. We talked earlier in our conversation today about the fact that families are spread out more, and you were sharing that your grandparents lived in Canada while you were growing up in the States.
Yeah.
I think it would be really neat when, after you read Grilled Cheese, Yes Please, you sit down and you talk with your kids about that extended family, and then maybe you pick up the phone, or you pick up the Zoom machine, and you have a conversation with those near and dear to you that are far away.
Yeah, that's a really special idea. And it is really cool, too. I feel I hear from people from all over, that really like my book. And I don't know, there's something really magical about picture books, and I feel it brings people together. And, just by having a book published, I feel that published book, reaches so many people and, brings them together. And so, yeah, I would encourage listeners to step into those kind of situations and reach out to family and come together.
Yeah, that's super. Tim, where can we go to find out more about Grilled Cheese, Yes Please, and find out more about you?
You can fire up the old Google machine, and on Penguin Random House, I have pages that for each book, Grilled Cheese, Yes Please, and Set Sail for Pancakes. So you can look on there, or you can just find me on Instagram or Twitter or Facebook, or just Google Tim Kleyn and grilled cheese, yes please, and you'll find my work.
Awesome. We've had a really great time speaking to the author and illustrator of Grilled Cheese, Yes Please. Our guest has been Tim Kleyn. Hey, Tim, thanks so much for being back with us.
Yeah, thanks so much for having me.
We hope you've enjoyed this episode of Reading with Your Kids and will join us for the next exciting episode of the show. In the meantime, please be sure to connect with us on social media, facebook.com/readingwithyourkids, at Reading With Your Kids on Instagram and TikTok, and at Jedley Magic on Twitter. Hey, we would love for you, wherever you listen to the show, to leave a comment. Give us a like, maybe ask a question. It's a great way to get your questions answered. It's also a great way to let other folks know about the show. If you're listening to us on the WREB AM/FM 24/7 radio network and want to ask us a question, please go to our website, readingwithyourkids.com, and click on the contact button up at the top of the page. Want to thank the folks who made today's show so wonderful. Of course, I want to start by thanking our guests. First, my amazing intern, Kayla Nuehlen, Rich Capriola, and Tim Kleyn. I want to thank the rest of my team, Fatima Khan, Rory Grady, Chris Doherty, Nick Warner, Kyoko Ito, Kristen Barrett, Sydney Swan, Hannah Rose. I want to thank my beautiful wife for all the support she gives me. Most of all, we all want to thank you. Thank you so much for taking the time to join us today, and as always, thank you so very much for taking the time to make the world a better place, and you do that every time you read with your kids. I'll be looking for you in the next edition of Reading with Your Kids.